Вітаю вас, друзі, в програмі «Українська Хвиля» в Монреалі. З вами я, Наталя Федосєєва. Сьогодні ми є в бібліотеці «Параграф» в Монреалі для обговорення щойно виданої книжки «Russia and Ukraine. Entangled Histories. Diverging States». Авторки Марія Попова, професорка з МcGill University в Монреалі, і Оксана Шевель, з University в Бостоні. Тут відбувається презентація і обговорення цієї книжки. Приєднуйтесь до нас, буде цікаво.
Професорка Марія Попова у своїх дослідженнях аналізує демократію, автократію, верховенство права та антикорупційні реформи в пострадянському регіоні.
She's done so many interviews, and these are, she explained to me once, they're like 3-hour blocks, at every morning show, every local show, so she's reaching Canadian and other audiences far and wide. I think this is a very, very difficult effort, especially for perhaps an academic. And yet I think Maria has shown incredible integrity and resolve to her profession and to the challenges that confront all of us today.
Книга «Russia and Ukraine» є першим дослідженням, яке намагається проаналізувати обидві сторони конфлікту в одному томі. Авторки стверджують, що повномасштабна війна є результатом циклу ескалації між російським імперіалізмом та прагненням України до незалежності. В книзі вони підсумовують майже тисячолітню історію Росії та України, аналізують геополітичну взаємодію між Росією, Україною та Заходом до 2014 року, розповідають про Революцію Гідності, подальшу анексію Криму, Донецької та Луганської областей. І стверджують, що повномасштабне вторгнення посилює розбіжності між Україною та Росією. Сама Марія зазначила, що головною метою написання книги – намагання підкреслити, що геополітичний вимір війни є другорядним. Основним же виміром війни – це розбіжності в ідентичності та управлінні двох країн. За словами Марії, курс зіткнення почався, тому що Росія не могла прийняти цю розбіжність.
There's no wonder that the collapse of the Soviet Union was done immediately following was the emergence of the Commonwealth of Independent States. A Commonwealth of Independent States, but in reality, from the very start, in Russia, there was an assumption that the independent states will be tied to it in both economic, political, and security ways. And we start with this misalignment of understanding. And we go through the next 30 years showing how basically what happened was that there was an escalatory cycle that developed between Ukraine's initial commitment to its independence and Russia's initial idea that there will be some form of reconstitution or re-imperialization of the area. And it's a escalatory cycle because what happened was that the more Ukraine committed to its independence, the more Russia thought that it should come up with ways to bridge the divergence. But the more Russia came up with these ways of pressuring and trying to bridge this divergence, the more Ukraine and Ukrainians committed to their independent statehood. So that led to this divergence in identity, which basically had the development and the emphasis on Ukraine's distinctive identity growing over time within Ukraine. We go over how, as Zhenya mentioned, more and more Ukrainians started speaking Ukrainian, started committing to the idea that Ukrainian is their language. We go over how historical memory changed. On the Russian part, initially, there is this moment in which there are competing versions of potentially defining Russian identity after the Soviet collapse. And there is some parts of the Russian political spectrum who want to push this idea that Russia is going to be a nation state that's going to be contained in its borders and it's going to define itself as the borders that it has. But gradually, that faction loses power, and more we have a process in which the imperial identity becomes stronger and grows in political importance. On the regime dimension, we have Ukraine's gradual commitment to democracy. The two really important contingencies there are the Orange Revolution in 2004, which creates the precedent within Ukraine that elections will not be manipulated, will not be stolen anymore, and indeed afterwards all the subsequent elections are free and fair. There's significant media freedom, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, rule of law, and corruption continue to be problems after the Orange Revolution, but after Euromaidan in 2013-14, we have another sort of contingent moment where things could have turned out differently, but at that moment, again, we have a strengthening of Ukrainian democracy. After 2014, it's in conjunction with the conditionality that comes from Ukraine's increasing aspirations to EU membership. So we've seen a lot of reforms in the post-2014 era and a lot of progress in controlling corruption and in establishing the rule of law. So Ukraine's political development is towards more and more democracy over the last 30 years. Russia's political development, unfortunately, on the other hand, is one that starts with some promise of political competition, which, however, quite quickly starts dissipating as early as '93. Yeltsin bombs parliament instead of reaching a compromise. Over time, the Russian political regime evolves towards greater and greater authoritarian consolidation. And after the first attack on Ukraine in 2014, we have, instead of a crisis in Russia, we actually see even further commitment to the idea of re-imperialization. It turns out that the annexation and occupation of Crimea is significantly popular in Russia. It helps the Putin regime consolidate autocracy even more. So it is this divergence between the two states that eventually sets the stage for the full-scale invasion of 2022.
And I wonder if since you've published the book, are there any new sort of narratives that you're seeing? Like, is there any novel, new negative narratives that are popping up, or is it still a kind of continuation of existing ones you've been seeing over the last 2 years?
One thing that I'll start with is to say that some of the narratives that we pushed back against early on, I think have been pretty much dispelled. You see fewer and fewer people bringing up the idea that Russia is denazifying Ukraine. I think that has lost credibility. So there's some success there, but I think the main narrative that is really hard to counter and is becoming even more important now is that Russia is all-powerful and bound to win, that is invincible. And that's, it's such an easy narrative to dispel, really, because Russia has lost wars before. Obviously, the Soviet Union collapsed under its own dysfunction and contradictions. So the all-powerful, I don't even know where the all-powerful narrative really comes from. But it is something that I notice the most as constantly reappearing and being a constant lens for interpreting any event. I mean, it's especially evident in how the results of the summer fighting have been interpreted, which is basically the actual results is that Russia has made no advances, and it has lost a significant part of its Black Sea fleet, and Ukraine has managed to reopen shipping, and basically at this point the Black Sea is not really safe for the Russian fleet. But you don't see this at all as the recap, the short recap of the summer. The short recap is the counteroffensive failed, and Russia is winning. So I think that's the narrative that is going to remain sort of constant and will have to be countered until Ukraine wins.
My question is more about the book writing process. As you published it quite quickly, actually after the full-scale invasion, how was it basically writing like in the first few months where we didn't know what was going to happen and it was evolving so fast? So how did you and Oksana manage that?
It's a really good question, which is going to reveal that in fact we wrote the book in a very condensed time period. We committed to writing it in the spring of 2022 because we had started writing these short pieces for Foreign Affairs and other outlets, sort of trying to push back against different arguments that were coming up. And the publishers came to us and said, why don't you develop this and put this all into a book? We spent the whole summer writing the introduction together, sentence by sentence on Zoom together. And we thought we have a lot of time where we have to finish it by the spring. But really, the bulk of the writing happened in between, let's say, Christmas and April. Oksana is the person working on identity and politics of memory, and she wrote the historical parts, and I've worked on regime-type democratization, rule of law reforms, anti-corruption reforms. So it was a very good complementary skill set, which allowed us to move fast.
I have a lot of questions, but I'll limit to two. Very short one. First, ultimate motive of Putin in this genocidal war. This is a term that is left out in newspapers, in comments. It's the genocidal war, and the genocidal war did not start 2 years ago. It started the first invasion when the South, Crimea, etc. was occupied, and genocide started, if you go by the United Nations.
On the genocidal nature of the war, indeed, I think because in some ways, the book ends with 2022 and what happened afterwards. We didn't have as much opportunity to talk about all the policies that Russia is implementing in the occupied territories, which are, you know, the kidnapping of children, etc., clearly genocidal acts that meet all the criteria. And but indeed, it is clear, and that's sort of the argument that we're making, is that the goal here is the destruction of the Ukrainian nation as it has been defined by Ukrainians themselves. So you cannot, basically Putin's whole argument is that this type of Ukraine, as Ukrainians define it, does not exist and should not exist.
Elle a présenté des arguments très forts pour contrer la rhétorique russe, la désinformation russe sur les raisons pour lesquelles Ils ont envahi l'Ukraine. On n'est pas sur place, évidemment. On en connaît seulement ce qu'il y a dans les médias, qui ne sont pas toujours très objectifs. Alors, c'est intéressant d'avoir le point de vue d'une universitaire qui connaît bien la dynamique et ce qui se passe sur le terrain et qui nous l'explique.
So Maria and Oksana's book is actually a very timely book because it comes after 2 years of full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, but also 10 years after the first Russian intervention in Ukraine. And I think the main argument of the co-authors is to bring back agency on these two countries because it's something that has been often swept away in media and other analysis. And by bringing the light on the two main actors of this war, notwithstanding, of course, all the Western implications and everything, it actually gives the reader another impression of the war going on right now.